Hey guys, so I already have the drawing drawn out in graphite. You saw me lifting some areas out. So what I'm doing right now is I'm mixing and putting down my shadow masses. It's a lot easier to work from dark to light when it comes to oil painting, and I'm trying to spread my efforts out. So I'm not isolating everything in one area. You'll see me working on the torso, then I go into the legs, into the arms, into the head, and just spreading out the efforts. I use the analogy kind of like washing a car. You would never put soap on one door and then wash that door and wax it. You want to bring the whole drawing together as a whole. And so I'm spreading out the efforts, especially in these beginning stages. You'll also see me mixing some middle values there. And I'm using those as transitional values as I'm painting. And making sure I'm softening some edges as I go, not working with just hard edges. I quickly start putting in my light masses. So I'm thinking about three essential values: my darkest darks, my middle values, and then my lights. You'll also see me picking up a brush, and that's about a 1-inch brush, and that brush has no paint on it. Every once in a while I'll take the brush and I'll swoop it across some of the paint, and that actually smooths out some of the transitions. And I'm changing brushes in between. I have a small round brush, and then I have a filbert, and then also a bright that I'm using to kind of soften some areas. The biggest key here in this stage is to make sure that you're squinting. It's really hard to see major shapes of value if you're just looking at the image, but when you squint, it really isolates all the key value shadow masses, I should say, together. And it also helps you see the light masses. Sometimes when I'm needing to put highlights in there, I'll go directly from the white instead of mixing up a color, because I've already gotten shadow mask down. So if you apply white directly to that, it'll just lighten it up. This particular painting took me about 2 hours to do, and the video you're watching right now is 13 minutes. So don't underestimate the process. I have a tissue in my left hand, and so in between I'm cleaning brushes and then also using multiple brushes that are in my left hand right now. I'm also using a paint thinner, and these are water-soluble paints. So when I'm putting areas into the figure, or when I'm painting areas of the figure, a lot of this is using the paint thinner. When you see me doing washes in the background, then I'm using more of the water to get the flow of the paint. But I've found that the paint thinner actually works a lot better. It's Winsor and Newton, I should say. Again, looking at those major shapes, isolating things down into major shapes versus focusing on too much detail. So you'll see me put down a massive value, and then I'll go back into that. You want to make sure that you also start working on your shadow mask. So if you look at my color palette tends to have a little bit more of, reds and purples in it. And so I opted for something more of a green for the shadow mask. So I'm giving you a little bit more complementary colors here. When I'm closer to the figure to thin out this paint, I'm using the paint thinner. When you see me switch to the larger filbert brush, I'm using water, and that helps the paint flow as well. So using traditional paint, you would just need to use your thinner or mineral spirits there. Also in this thigh, one thing you could see here is that I'm actually softening some of the edges. So when you put in your background, make sure you're not giving a very hard outline around your figure or any subject matter for that instance. And the way you soften that is when both sides of the paint are wet. So in this case, if the figure is wet and if the background is wet, you're able to take a brush and just kind of go over both areas at the same time. And that softens that edge for you. So I just wanted to spread this paint out all the way to the edges of the canvas. So I have a background, and I wanted the areas outside the figure to look more translucent, almost like watercolor. So therefore I'm using water in this area. When I get closer to the figure, I'm using more paint thinner instead of water, which gives it more of an oil flow over the watery flow. And I also have resin gel on my palette as well, and the resin gel kind of acts almost like a linseed oil. So it's an oil base that you can mix into your paint to thin it out. This whole painting, as I mentioned, was 2 hours, and it's not done. So when the finished stages are according to the drawing or painting, when you see the finished stages, I would still need to work on the hand and the feet a little bit more. But this gives you an idea of my painting process. Usually when I'm working on one area, I'll move to the other area, then move to another area and bounce around. You can see my canvas started to buckle a little bit. This is just a canvas pad, and it's not mounted on any stretcher bars. One thing I will talk about that a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to figure is the genitals. It's like, how much do you put? I always wondered, how much do you put in? How much effort do you put? Do you skip it? And so what I found is that you have to, paint the genitals in there, but you don't want to overdo it. So making sure you don't zoom in too much on your image if you're working from a photograph is important. Remember, if you were to be working or painting from a figure from life, you wouldn't be like right up to their face. So you don't want to zoom in too much. And usually a lot of times when I'm looking at this image, I have it more in a zoomed out version. You saw the little photograph off to the left side there. So not only do I have him printed off to my left side, I also have him on my computer in front of me. And so when I'm confused about an area or want to see more detail, I can zoom in. But for the most part, I'm zoomed out. And so when I'm working on this area here, if I keep it zoomed out, I'm not going to put too much detail there, but I'll put everything that needs to be there, according for you to see it and not wonder why something's missing or something's overdone. So that's an important tip, is make sure you don't keep the drawing or the photograph zoomed in too much, because then you'll overdo it. Working little details into the light mass, I usually cover my canvas, so even in areas that I would consider to be white, I'm not just leaving the canvas exposed. And a lot of times, even in sculpture, unless your sculpture is, very glossy marble, then you won't have those stark highlights anyways. So just really pay attention to how much white you see, or if it's really white. A lot of this paint you're seeing here is a mixture of, you could see my color palette video before this, so you saw what mixture it is. But when I want to get the lightest lights in there, I'll just opt for pure white. But that still mixes with the paint that I already have. One tip if you're working in shadow masses here, just make sure that your lights in your shadow mass are not as light as your light in your light mass. So you want to basically put down a layer of paint and then work within that layer of paint. So you would work in the shadow masses and go a little lighter, and then the light masses, keep it white, and then add your little darks to it. The face was a struggle. I usually work very, very large, so to do this little head was a struggle for me, so I'll admit it. But just keep working layers, moving the paint around. Think about it like sculpture. So it's not just, one and done. For the most part, there's a lot of adjusting. And if you, in your mind, can kind of think about, hey, I'm going to have to adjust some things, then it's not frustrating. I know for me, when I paint, the initial layer is usually never, 100% accurate. And so I know there's going to be adjustment. I know I'll need to repaint something, move something around, shift something. And so I try not to get hung up on, the little things when something's frustrating. And you'll notice I kind of step away from the head and go somewhere else. And what you don't see in this video is I did take one break that was about, 30 minutes. I cropped that out, but it's important to take those breaks. Step back from your piece. Look to see what's working. Squint a lot, not only at the reference photo, but squint at your own piece. And the way I pulled this head together was just by, squinting and seeing the shadow masses as shapes, not really thinking so much about all the details. Once you get the shapes down, that sets your framework for the details. It's just like building a house. If your structure is not there, if the framework is not established, then it doesn't matter how well you can paint. Another reason why it's important to work on your background at the same time as working on your figure, it's just like when I mentioned with sculpture, it gives you the opportunity to carve out So not only can you add on top of that background, but you can use the background to take out what didn't need to be there on the figure. So that's a technique I used for the front of the face there. You saw me applying that paint to adjust the portrait. It's not always about adding things. Sometimes it's about taking things away. And it's a process. I've been painting for a while. So if you're watching this video and maybe you're wondering why you're not here yet, it's just I've messed up more than you. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. There's several artists out there that are way better than me. But this is what I have to show you. So, and be proud of your accomplishments. Be proud of what you're doing and just know that you're always learning. You don't have to be like everybody else, which is why there's so many artists out there. Everybody's unique. My painting style is one way. You'll see several other artists that are different ways. So it's great to, try new things, try new methods. And I got into this water-soluble paint when I was in college, actually. I'd started off with traditional oil paint, but when I was in school, I get migraines. And when I left the studio, the migraines started to subside. And then I spoke to my teacher and was asking her, why is this happening? And it's all the fumes and the toxins and the chemicals in the paint. So she encouraged me to switch to water soluble. So ever since then, for years now, I've been working with the water soluble paint. So I know there's a lot of you guys out there that are like, no, traditional only, but it was mainly for health reasons why I switched over, and I hadn't had a problem since then. So if you're experiencing anything like that, it could be from the paint. You want to make sure you're well ventilated. And I'm not saying that with water soluble, you can just work in a closet either, but it's less toxic than it is working with traditional paint. Make sure you have different variety of brushes. You can switch between, your detail brushes, your big brushes, your small brushes. And then you can almost think about like subtractive charcoal. You saw me adding the ear right there. The ear wasn't existing before. I can just paint on top of layers. And for the most part, all the paint is wet here. And so you really just have to squint and isolate your values and know that if you're trying to put an ear in, and if it's not getting as light as you want, well, guess what? The ear's in the shadow mask, so it doesn't need to get that light. So darkening up some of the shadow mask behind the figure to let the figure pop out. And I've mixed kind of two different versions of that green. One is a little darker, and then one is a little lighter. So that when I get to areas, you can see it here in the leg. On the right side of the leg is lighter, and so the background's darker. But on the left side of the leg, it's darker, so the background's lighter. So you always want to juxtapose the value. And there we go.